Well, welcome to the show, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Andy Salkeld. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us, Andy. For people that might not know you, just tell us a bit about your background and your expertise. We'll dip into your story a bit more, but just a little bit of context.
So, I always describe myself as having a life of two halves. So I am a chartered accountant. I trained in the Big Four, specializing in corporate finance. I then moved out into industry, did the whole kind of like specializing in business intelligence, data, deals, analytics, everything like that. And now after all of that, I am an investor, director, and co-owner at a small startup business based where I am in Leeds. But as I said, it's two halves. So here's the other side that we don't always say. My name is Andy. I live with depression. I have been suicidal at 3 points in my life. I struggle through most days trying to figure out what happened, where my life was, where my life now is. And I've started talking about it. I've started talking about it openly throughout organizations across the country. And I've now even written a book about it. And the reason I share both sides of that is because often we don't introduce our real selves. We introduce ourselves as what we do, not who we are. So I want to make sure that everyone knows everything about me for an honest and open conversation.
It's a really interesting point that sits well with me. 4 years ago, I had a stroke, a brain hemorrhage, and it was very unexpected. And it does take your confidence away. I'm not allowed to drive now. I lost some vision. And even 3 weeks ago, here we are in the middle of COVID-19, and I had a seizure. So I now have epilepsy. And it just helps me to articulate that in conversation so that people know. So let's track back a little bit, Andy. You were a successful accountant. And did the depression, the suicide, did that come on while you were in that role?
So like for the best part, I have worked in accounting within the profession.
Right.
And probably about 5-6 years ago now, I was formally diagnosed with depression. I went to speak to a doctor, but looking back, I've probably lived with it throughout most of my life. And I was in a point where it was very mid-career, midlife, not really certain where the future was going. There was nothing exciting on the horizon, both in work and in my kind of outside life.
Okay.
And then various factors happened, various things went on in my life that took it from okay, I think I've got this handled. I think I can work through this, accept this, to no, this is too much. I don't want this anymore.
When you get to that point, does it come overnight and there's a final straw that breaks the camel's back, or is it just a gradual dawning and awareness that something's wrong?
I think from the depression standpoint, I learned to live with kind of the numbness that came with it, the lack of
So it wasn't
emotion.
something that flipped and overnight you went.
Yeah. So in my case, when I thought I was at rock bottom, when I thought there was nothing left that could be taken from me,
Yeah.
my wife left.
Okay.
And I was, and that was too much. I was by myself at what I thought was rock bottom, and now I was by myself further below it. However, looking back from where I sit now, it was actually, my wife and I are still friends. We're actually quite comfortable talking to each other and so on.
Yeah.
And we've both become much happier in ourselves than we ever were prior to that point. So whilst it's easy to say what caused it, what's actually come from it is so much greater overall.
Talk to us about the perceived stigma of mental health, because in roles like accounting, professional services, you qualify for years, you're super smart, super technical, very driven, you're that trusted advisor, there's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. That's not a place to show weakness, is it?
So there's a twofold part to this. The first one is exactly what you say. Ours is a profession of the mind. We use our minds in everything we do. And admitting that you may have something wrong with your mind, and I don't really like the term wrong, but a perceived wrong, that there is something that isn't working as well as it could. It's almost an it is seen, whether it is or isn't doesn't matter. It's whether it's seen to be a failure in your career as well.
Mm.
Similarly, within the kind of professions, accounting as one of them, they are very Darwinian in nature. There are whole peer groups of people brought in, and then the promotion prospects throughout are very competitive. There might be only 5 managers that get promoted up in a year group out of, say, 20 or something like that.
Yeah, it's hierarchical. Only a few people get to partner, so it is survival of the fittest, isn't it?
Precisely. So when if someone says, I'm struggling, I'm stressed, I can't handle this, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Whether it is or isn't marked against them doesn't matter. It's they believe that it could be marked against them in some regard, and therefore they don't speak about it, which can actually exacerbate the problem further. That's certainly what happened in my case.
Well, it's career suicide, isn't it, to admit that you can't cope with the pressures that you put under, because it's all about billable hours and charging time and handling responsibility and talking to important clients, and that's massive pressure.
And for me, at least, I thought talking openly about this was going to be the death knell of my career.
Yeah. And did it prove to be?
No. But what I would say is, what I'm doing now, what I'm doing by sharing my story, by writing about it, by working with large organizations, accounting practices, legal practices, etc. now, is because I'm being honest with myself and who I am. More people want to work with me than ever before. More people care about what I say and about my opinions. And it's far more rewarding than any job I ever had in finance. Now, just because the work isn't necessarily finance related, not necessarily doing a financial project or a merger and acquisition, but I am enjoying what I do so much more, and that is far more valuable than anything else that could come from just a job in finance.
Well, it sounds Shakespearean. To thine own self be true, doesn't it?
It's one of the most important things we can all do.
Yeah. Tell us about how well accountants as a race cope with change, disruption, pressure, Andy.
I mean, we accountants in general actually are pretty good at managing change. I mean, a lot of what our profession revolves around is managing risk,
Right.
and risk comes with change and so on. So we understand it well. However, we're also, we're very thoughtful about it. And what happens is when we're thinking about the change, the risk, particularly what's going on in the world right now, we can often get distracted from what's actually happening by worrying about the ifs, the buts, the maybes, the variables out there, when actually what's really important right now is just where we are. Life itself exists, and that's far more valuable than worrying about all these other things that could happen and so on.
So you said you were diagnosed with depression while at work. How did you manage your mental health while you were working in a very pressured accounting environment? And how has that changed now?
So at the time, I didn't manage it. I wasn't managing it at all.
What did that look like, not managing it?
As in, I threw myself into the work. I put all of me into all the work I was doing, everything. I didn't give myself time to think about what mattered to me.
But that was your validation, Andy, wasn't it? That was your value. That was your worth. That was your identity.
What I was seeking acceptance from within my work.
Okay.
I was seeking acceptance for what I was doing, not who I was. And now that's completely pivoted. So I have accepted who I am internally, and therefore I don't necessarily need the world to perceive and accept me for who I am, because I've accepted myself.
But ironically, if you are feeling the strain and your solution to that is to immerse yourself more in the work, doesn't that exacerbate the problem?
Exactly. You distract yourself from what's actually happening, and you put yourself into it, and because you're distracting from what's going on, it can actually cause, particularly in my case, it caused me to underperform. I considered myself a failure in my work because all I was doing was working, but I was distracted from working because of everything else that was going on in my head and around me.
Mm. And given that it's like being a football manager or a football, isn't it? It's a very much a results business. It's performance related. It's charging the hours, making the right decisions, handling the clients. There is such a lot at stake. If you cannot cope with that, then what's left for you?
Precisely. That is where I ended up thinking there was nothing left, when actually there is a whole, there is the rest of the world out there. And being bound by just the thought process, being bound by what I describe as a life by numbers, where it's all about hitting your targets, hitting your measurements, but also the measurements in life, like when you get married, when you buy your first house, when you have your first child, everything like that. By constantly telling myself what I should have been doing, I was forgetting what I could have been doing, and so on.
Mm. We talked earlier about the perceived stigma. When you come out, for want of a better phrase, and admitting that you've got some problems, the culture in accounting firms from top down leadership, they don't understand mental health, do they? I mean, how do they cope with an admission like that?
And I mean, this is something I have been speaking to organizations about, is what would you actually do if one of your employees came to you and said they were suicidal?
Mm.
Genuinely, how would you handle that? Because that's a reality of what can happen,
Yeah.
and so on. And I certainly never felt I could say those things within an organization. Now, luckily, the organizations I'm speaking with, they are so receptive. And this is the thing a lot of the employees don't necessarily know or feel, is that the people in there care. They care massively, because the people in accounting, in all professional services, are the lifeblood of the business. And without the people, there isn't a business. So the leadership will actually do anything they can to help. But here's the other thing about business. We make data-driven decisions. We can't make decisions to help people unless we know they need help, and so on. So if people aren't speaking, if people aren't talking, then we can't necessarily make the change necessary to help those people. But as a great example, I gave a talk a few years ago, a year or so ago, on Time to Talk Day in 2019, I think, a large legal practice. And I heard later on from the partner that invited me in that one of their team members had come to them the next day and said, you know what, I feel I'm probably about 2-3 steps behind where Andy was, and I need help. And that person is now being helped and is thriving within that organization, because they actually stood up and said they need it.
So within yourself now that you're speaking openly about mental health, how have things changed for you? You seem certainly a lot more liberated and a lot more authentic.
Yeah, so I would kind of go about this with the whole kind of like, look, I know that this is me. I am medicated. I speak to a therapist. I care for myself. I look after myself. And those things have slowly but surely over the years helped me accept who I am. Because for the best part of my life, I never showed who I really was. I never told people what really mattered to me, and so on. But now I am so much more comfortable in my own skin than I've ever been.
How well do you feel the accounting profession, professional services have adopted, shall we say, a concern for mental health? Back in the day, this was not spoken about, but people like you are pioneering, and it's almost like gay marriage. There's so much of it around now. It's so accepted, and transgender and everything else. It becomes part of the everyday conversation. Are you seeing they're coping better now with the mental health conversation?
Yeah, so I've seen I've been involved with organizations, and they are going through a change. Like I speak directly with partners. One of the partners at RSM even wrote a foreword to my book, and has said openly that seeing this story from a friend, because we trained in practice together,
Right.
seeing what has happened has helped him change change the culture within the organization he works for now. And and everyone is so receptive. One of the wonderful things about large professional practices that I still love, and I genuinely adore this, is there is a community. There is a lot of people in there, and they do care about each other.
Yeah.
But it's now facilitating the conversations to learn how we can better help each other. And particularly with what's going on in the wider world, in the COVID-19 context, places are opening up more, places are talking. Leaders are actually leading by example and sharing their stories, how they're struggling. And that's in turn facilitating their team members to actually start talking openly. And it's just building a better and more mentally healthy culture all round.
There's something in that. When a leader is vulnerable, that opens the doors for people around and below them to admit similar flaws.
And it's one of the biggest things I've been advocating throughout the COVID-19 pandemic is now is the time to actually embrace vulnerability, because there is no one out there who is okay right now. Everyone is struggling, suffering in their own way. So now is a time when you can actually talk openly and say, well, you know what? I'm having a really bad day because I don't know what's going on right now. No one does.
Yeah.
And by saying that, by admitting it, by sharing it with your teams, suddenly they'll feel, oh, wow, this person's human too.
Yeah.
And that connection there, it opens the door for so much.
Uncertainty is a great leveler, though. The problem with that is that leaders are expected in uncertainty to have all the answers, and they can't possibly.
No one has all the answers right now. And one of the biggest learning points I ever learned throughout my career is it was on a day where I met a partner who I used to work with, and they asked me something about what I was doing. And they were like, wow, that's incredible. How do you understand that? I was like, oh, wow, we're different, but suddenly we're the same. We're all people. And when I learned to take the partners, the leaders off the pedestal that we've risen them up on, and just say, well, actually, you're a person too. That opened the door, and suddenly all my kind of relationships with the partners out there, the directors, everything like that, suddenly I just felt so much more comfortable speaking to them. And one of the things the employees, the kind of staff should know right now is actually the partners don't have all the answers. They've never been here before. The only history we have of this is of maybe 100 odd years ago when there was it Spanish flu or something like that. No one really knows what's happening. And the way we get through it is by working together, saying how we can help each other and so on.
Well, some people don't cope, and you got to the point in your depression where you wanted to take your own life. Tell us about that suicide story, and apparently your best friend saved your life. So talk to us about what happened.
Yeah, so as I said before, I was living what I describe as a kind of midlife mediocrity of melancholy, where I was just kind of like, oh, this is such a middling existence that there was no excitement, there was no joy in my life. And my wife left on her own journey, and that's hers to tell. I will never take that away from her, because it is inspiring. It actually inspired me to do what I'm doing. But I was researching how to kill myself on the same computer we're having this conversation over now, the same computer I wrote my book on, and all of this. And I kind of settled on, well, it's two ways. I either jump from a building or I hang myself from my stairs. And I settled on the latter because I was full of shame. I was full of regret and embarrassment. And I didn't want someone to find out. I wanted it to be mine. I convinced myself a selfish act was selfless, in that the short-term pain of me going would be better than the long-term pain of me existing. So I was there, I was sat ready with with belts as a noose. And there was a vibration, a perturbation, and I got a text message, and it was a message from my best friend, and it said, like, it wasn't even much of a message. It said something along the lines of just pub ? Because we were meant to be meeting up in a few weeks, and we don't see each other that often, but it was enough, because what it did was it reminded me that when I was nothing, when I was at my absolute rock bottom, not the rock bottom I thought I was at, the actual rock bottom.
Yeah.
When I had no value in myself, that there was someone out there that still held value in me. And that was all it took. That was all it took that day. And there have been other days, but that is the day my life changed, because I stopped caring about where I was relative to other people, and I started caring about me and about where I had gone wrong and how I could improve as a person. And like this is a very cut down version. There's an entire chapter dedicated to this in Life is a 4-Letter Word, where I talk through all the, like, what I describe as my 7 failures. And most people would say 7 failures, that's not a lot. And I was like, no, these are big failures. These are, like, it caps off with my failure as a human being, because I had no emotion, no feeling, no kind of emotional intelligence left. So there's a lot more detail that it goes into. But I share that story now so openly and so freely to help others know there are ways back from the darkest of times.
Yeah. Tell us about Hurricane Glass and how therapists changed your life for the better. This is in the book, isn't it, Andy?
Yeah, so Hurricane Glass is a song. So it's a song by an artist called Catherine Feeney. And it's not the sort of music I normally listen to. But it has a lyric in it that saved my life, that taught me how to appreciate life now. And it's very simple. It just goes, it's not what I wanted. It's not what I planned. It's not where I thought I'd be. It's just where I am. And to me, that is the ideal of acceptance, to be able to say, look, whatever happened in the past, whatever I planned, it doesn't matter anymore. Whatever could happen in the future, whatever might be, it doesn't matter, because it's not written. What matters is where you are in the present. And with regards to therapy and speaking to a therapist, that changed my life. I wrote an article recently called It Changed My Life. And I started out saying, but did it really? And looking back, it did, because speaking to someone who isn't attached to my life, my kind of existence, someone who doesn't necessarily know it all, but allows you through a process to kind of articulate what you are thinking and what you are feeling, help me really appreciate what mattered. And having a therapist, speaking to someone, is something I'll advocate to everyone out there. It allows you to reflect on yourself. So yeah, I would genuinely say just try it. It's not like the movies. It's far more rewarding.
Well, it's from experience, and it's sometimes very difficult to articulate emotions that you're having and thoughts that you're thinking in a way that other people can understand. So if you've got people that can help get that out of you, that's better for mental health, surely.
Yes, exactly. And it's about learning. It's about learning and understanding emotions and feeling, because particularly from my experience in accounting, I was told for the longest time that I'm too emotional, that I wear my heart on my sleeve all the time.
Accountants are not emotional feeling beings, surely, aren't they? Robots and androids?
That is the perception, but we actually have a lot of feeling. But then again, if you describe yourself as a creative accountant, that comes with a whole load of connotations.
Well, yeah, but there's an article in you, Andy, that accountants have a soul. That might do it, but yeah, they are people, aren't they? If people want to find out more about your story, Andy, learn more about the book, what's a good way for them to reach out to you?
So the best ways to find me, I have a website at andysalkeld.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, most social media as Andy_Salkeld. The book is available all over the world in most major retailers and online websites. Right now, I'm suggesting to people to purchase, particularly in the UK, through Hive, which supports local independent bookstores, because God help us, they probably need it, and so on. And in general, you can find more of my story in my book on my website, and I'm more than happy for people to connect with me or contact me through any of those mediums.
That's great, Andy. And in closing, would you just leave us with some encouraging words for the accountants, the leaders listening, to get their head around this topic? What tips, advice would you give to them?
My biggest thing that I say to a lot of people is, it's not about you. It's never about you. It's about the other people out there. So whilst you may feel everything is fine with yourself, you may think you're okay. Being vulnerable and being open is about helping other people and letting go of kind of the ties of being the strongest, the stoic, the like Vulcan-like emotionless armor and so on. Take it off. Show people who you really are, because they'll be far more engaged with you.
What a world we would have if it was a strength to show weakness.
It is.
Well, Andy Salkeld, that's been inspiring. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
You've been watching or listening to the Accounting Influencers podcast, featuring hosts Rob Brown and Martin Bissett, with key interviews, what's working in the accounting profession, and news from the accounting and fintech world that helps you do your jobs better. We go out to 144 countries, over 20,000 unique listeners, with 100,000 downloads, and it is accredited for continued professional education and development. Thank you for tuning in.